Would you please take your seats? Thank you for the music, Dr. Worley. We appreciated it. Welcome. Before I say a word about our program tonight and introduce the person who will introduce our speaker, I would like to say a prayer for our speaker. The Lord be with you. Let us pray this collect from the Book of Common Prayer for those who influence public opinion. Almighty God, you proclaim your truth in every age by many voices. Direct in our time, we pray, those who speak where many listen and write what many read, that they may do their part in making the heart of this people wise, its mind sound, and its will righteous, to the honor of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Good evening. My name is Kelly Kirby. I'm the rector of this church, and I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. Welcome to Dimensions of Faith, a twice-yearly speaker series where St. Matthew's invites thinkers and writers to explore the interface of religion and culture as we continue to challenge our minds and renew our spirits. All programs are free and open to the public. After the program tonight, there will be books for sale and a book signing reception just outside of these doors. You are all welcome to stay. The restrooms are located just down the hall from the welcome desk. St. Matthew's is so very fortunate to have an awesome youth minister and librarian who oversees many libraries. Lindsay Serrano will now introduce our speaker.
Good evening, everybody. I want to take you back to 2014. I was a new school librarian here in Louisville, and I was introduced to the lyrical elegance of Silas House's words when I read Same Son Here along with our middle school students. His writing has a magical quality that captivated me and made me feel at home in my new surroundings. And I think this is a feeling that so many of our students had and so many adults and readers of all ages have when they read his books. Silas House has given us poignant and poetic stories and works of fiction that explore themes of family, love, and life. His works include 6 novels, plays, books of creative nonfiction, including Clay's Quilt, A Parchment of Leaves, Eli the Good, and my personal favorite, Southernmost. He has received critical acclaim and numerous awards, including the E.B. White Award for Best Children's Book for his novel Same Son Here, co-authored with Neela Vaswani in 2013, the Nautilus Book Award for his novel Clay's Quilt in 2002, and the Weatherford Award for Best Novel for Southernmost in 2019. Silas House's latest book, Lark Ascending, explores themes of grief, identity, and how community and culture can become a healing balm. And earlier this week, he was named Kentucky's Poet Laureate. So back to 2014, I finished Same Son Here, rolled up my sleeve, and was inspired to make sure that the work that I do centered on themes of compassion, connection, and inclusion. His words are a blueprint for all of us on what a community that affirms our identities can look like, and the work that we have to do to create that feeling of belonging in our classrooms, in our churches, and in our communities. We are honored to welcome Mr. Silas House to the St. Matthew's Dimensions of Faith program, he will undoubtedly inspire and enrich us all. Let us give a warm welcome to our speaker, Silas House.
Good evening. I'm so glad to be here at St. Matthew's with all of you tonight. I'm so thankful to you for spending some time with me. I'm thankful to Julie Mushkin, who organized this entire event and very patiently worked with me to get me here. It was a pleasure to worship this morning with this congregation and to get to know people in this community. I'm thankful to Kelly Kirby, Benjamin Hart, Jan Schlotz, and everyone at St. Matthew's for their hospitality. I am going to speak to you for about 40 minutes, and then 45 minutes, and then I will turn the conversation over to you in the hopes that you will have some questions and we can talk a little bit. But first, this is Containing Multitudes. In one of my favorite novels, Gilead, by Marilyn Robinson, her lead character, Ames, writes, "For me, writing has always felt like praying. You feel as if you are with someone." Writing has always been my strongest connection to God. Art has been my salvation. Truly, writing saved me as a child when I needed it most. Now, when I say God, this is just my shorthand for the concept of the God of my understanding, meaning my own concept of God. I think a lot of us were raised with this notion of God as an old white man with a big, long, white beard floating in the sky above us. And while that was how I came to picture God when I was a child, I always had a much more deeply spiritual understanding of what God might mean. Even when I didn't know that I could find God in art, art began to show me that. Storytelling showed me that first, since I grew up in a family of storytellers. I was adored within my family, but I was also an outsider because I was a reader in a family that only read the Bible. When we went fishing, or I was taken hunting, or to ball games, I always took a book with me. And inevitably, the book would hold my attention more than the intended outing. I was an outsider because of the way I observed and thought about the world. And beyond my family, I was certainly an outsider, mostly for being gay, but sometimes for being a person of faith, too, in the literary culture and within academia. Two areas that often snub their noses at belief, and two areas that have very little comprehension of what poverty or lower class life is really like, although they certainly talk ad nauseum about those facets of life. Being an outsider has served me well because writers need to be standing in the corner alone, observing, just as we need to also form a community of like-minded people. Being gay and being a person of faith are not two things that people often put together. But a recent study proves that most LGBT people are people of faith, despite the way most churches have treated us. Being raised working class in a trailer and being a New York Times best-selling writer and a graduate school professor are also things that are not often thought of in the same sentence. Yet, here I am, an accented person, raised in the trailers of rural Appalachia and roaming the halls of academia and literature, often feeling like an outsider, riddled constantly with imposter syndrome. I am a father and a son, a husband and a teacher. I am an accented person. I'll tell you in case you didn't realize that. I am a coal miner's grandson. I am a lunch lady's son, a mechanic's son. I am in love with the natural world. I'm a dog person. I'm a writer. As Walt Whitman wrote, do I contradict myself? Very well then, I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes. So tonight, I want to talk to you about containing multitudes, which we all do, although so often we find ourselves distilled down to only one thing. We have to remind ourselves that we are complex creatures that cannot be so easily defined, that we are holy creatures. Sometimes we label ourselves too singularly. Other times, the whole rest of the world does that for us. I am often troubled by how easily we think in absolutes these days. The internet has made this so much easier for us to do. I find that often people are cemented as either saints or monsters with no complexity in between, with no real humanity in between. Because humans are both good and bad, we contradict ourselves. We are made up of many different facets, not just one. So we must stop reducing each other this way. We have to listen to each other's stories. So tonight, I'll tell you some of mine. First, I'll tell you my experience being a person of faith. I have had this unexplainable faith for as long as I can remember, and I had a profound relationship with God from a very early age. On more than one occasion, I was convinced God was speaking to me. One time, I remember very clearly, I was in my backyard playing on my metal swing set by myself. I spent lots of time alone, by choice and not by choice. As I was swinging, a great wind tore down the valley, the kind of wind that turns out the pale sides of leaves, that spreads a shiver out over everything in its path. I was certain that this was God passing through, and I believe I heard God speak to me. I am here, the voice came. In that moment, I needed someone there with me. I had felt very alone, but suddenly I felt I was with someone. Instead of telling anybody that this had happened, I went into the house and got out my little notebook where I wrote down everything. You'll note there that being outside led me to going in to write. The natural world has always been my other deepest spiritual connection, and being outside has always been my greatest impetus for writing. Lots of artists I know relate similar experiences privately. Perhaps some of us are artists because of our strict Christian upbringings, and our wildly creative minds led to these encounters. Perhaps as writers, we were doing what writers and artists are supposed to do: hearing like an animal, seeing like a camera, feeling everything intensely. For this is the artist's great responsibility: to listen, see, feel, smell, taste, to experience everything as intensely as we can, and then to report our findings. These days, lots of Christians make me ashamed to call myself a Christian, honestly. More and more, I simply call myself a person of faith because I feel my faith system has been hijacked by a vocal, obnoxious, mean-hearted minority who have weaponized our religion to damage, to negate, to erase. Often nowadays, many Christians are taught that our job is to judge and condemn. Too many believers have been taught they can know the mind of God and be God's enforcers here on earth. Many do not hear the message of compassion that was brought by Christ. I've had to remind myself of that many times over the last few years when I've witnessed people I know to be loving, kind people reveal a meanness in them when they've defended politicians or celebrities who are celebrating bigotry, hatred, erasure. The greatest heartbreak of my life right now is witnessing family members I love supporting politicians who seek to negate my experience as an LGBT person. It has sometimes been hard for me to retain the belief that some people in my life have held on to their goodness when I see them celebrating people who proudly stand for bigotry. How can my cousin claim to love me and then vote for someone who wants to punish my child for being trans, for someone who wants to make it illegal to say the word gay in a classroom, for someone who perpetuates the idea that immigrants are evil or that black lives don't matter? I have struggled to hold on to seeing the sacredness that exists in people vomiting hatred. So I've had to learn how to love from afar. I've had to learn how to recognize the sacred parts of them while also issuing boundaries. I've had to learn that removing myself from situations does not mean that I'm no longer the peacemaker. I've had to learn that it is not fair to always be put in the situation of being the bigger person when the other one is simply being mean-hearted. I want to love everyone, but that does not mean that I must kowtow to them. I appreciate a quote by the great writer Robert Jones Jr. that helps me to articulate my feelings on this the best. He wrote, "We can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and the denial of my humanity and my right to exist." To me, that's acknowledging that we can love and listen to others who have different opinions, but we don't have to make ourselves unsafe to do so. And we don't have to accept being negated. I believe we can be angry with them, and we can be frustrated with them. We can even put them out of our lives, but we cannot lose our love for them. Sometimes I'm confused by the modern state of Christianity and religion. Sometimes I question its validity in the modern world. Sometimes I question everything, which is something I was taught to never do in my childhood church. "We are not to question God," was the refrain back then. And more eloquently, we were reminded that God moved in mysterious ways. And we were not to wonder too much about his great mind. But I believe questioning is a way to better understand. I believe that when my faith is challenged, it becomes stronger. I believe the thing I love most about my faith is that it is a mystery. This was a journey for me, though, because I was raised evangelical. My first memory is of my mother being slain in the Spirit. I was 6, and I had been sleeping under the hard wooden pews of the Lily Holiness Church on the plush poinsettia red carpet. Church service sometimes lasted 2 or 3 or even 4 hours. And at some point, the children in the congregation faded away, lulled to sleep by chant-like prayers and the curling staccato rhythms of the Holy Ghost. But the music was moving through the church house like a train again, and the crash of cymbals, the deep thunk, thunk, thunk of the bass drum, the clinking, pounding piano keys, the high squall of a beehive-haired woman crying out to God had awakened me. I crawled out from under the pews and found everyone was standing. Their eyes were closed, holy languages chewing at their lips, prayers eating their ways through the ceiling, arms swaying, palms open, fingers spread wide as if light might shoot out of their polishless fingertips. Some of them couldn't quite control their bodies. Heads lolled about on their necks or shot back and forth in a quick rhythm like the headbangers I would see much, much later once I had laid down my own religion and gone to concerts where people did things like headbang and smoke pot and drink out of boot flasks. Quite a few danced. This one shuffling in place with a gentle lift of his feet, this one running up and down the aisles like a chicken with its head cut off, this one twirling round and round, a woman showing off her bell-shaped skirt. Then they're the ones up front at the altar, speaking the holiest of tongues, a low hum that could not so much be heard as seen in the occasional convulsions that electrified them, God sizzling up and down their bodies, so that they had been knocked to the floor and lay there. My mother was one of them. Being slain, they called it, slain in the Spirit. And this is what everyone wanted. This was the highest form of worship. This was only accomplished by those who lived right, who were the best people, the most holy, the most revered, the ones without blemish. Someone had spread a white towel over my mother's nylon legs so her denim skirt would not ride up and betray her modesty. My first reaction was to be afraid. My mother was lying in the floor, seemingly unconscious and in the midst of a fit that lightened through her body, her lips trembling, the muscle in her jaw jerking as if her face had been overtaken by tremors. But then I knew, oh, she's just slain, I thought. Already I knew the language of my people, of my culture. Other words that we said that didn't mean the same things to us as they did to others, to normal people. Shouting. To us, shouting meant to be overtaken by the Holy Ghost, which sometimes resulted in dancing, sometimes in speaking in tongues, and sometimes in outright yelling, as the name would imply. Having church. This did not mean the act of actually holding a church service. Instead, this was the moniker for when church really, really got going. Now we're having church, you know. Now we're cooking with grease, sort of the same idea. And words like anointed. While most people would think of this as a verb defining the action of putting oil on someone, to us it meant that you had been chosen by God. You had been anointed because you lived such a good life that you were worthy of this richest blessing. Just slain, I thought. Slain. I was proud of her because this meant she was one of the holy ones. And I believed and believed and believed until one day I began to question and question and question. And for years I had far more questions than answers. So as you can see by what I've just shared, I grew up in a holiness family, and we didn't go to a church so much as a sect. Holiness is an extreme form of Pentecostal. Our church had no umbrella religious organization that anyone had to answer to. Lily Holiness Church came into being because a preacher took the notion to build a church, and he did, becoming the be-all, end-all voice for his dozens of faithful congregants, who gave what little they could in the wooden offering plate that was passed around during every church service. The church was evangelical, fundamentalist, a strong emphasis on a literal reading of the Bible, and only the King James Version. Any other version was thought of as treachery. The church was very strict, and anything that didn't have to do with church was considered a sin. Carnivals, trick-or-treating, movies, secular music, dancing, especially dancing. The women were not allowed to cut their hair or wear makeup or jewelry. They were told to wear ankle-length skirts. Strangely enough, the men had no such rules on physical requirements. I grew up in constant fear that I would be left behind when the rest of my family and community was whisked away in the twinkling of an eye during the rapture. By the time I was 11, I knew I was gay, so I knew this was surely enough to strand me on earth. Preachers had been telling me my whole life that I wasn't worthy of God's love as a little gay boy. A common and much repeated sermon in our church throughout the mid to late 80s was a wish that all the gay men would be rounded up and put on an island where they would hopefully give AIDS to one another and therefore kill each other out. This was something I heard not only from the pulpit, but in the hallways of my school and even in the homes of some of my own family. Despite this constant negation from the pulpit and the community, I held on to that faith. I did not believe that this was the way God operated. But I did often wonder if I would burn forever in a lake of fire for simply being who I was. In those moments, my faith in God was always stronger than my fear. Not too long ago, I wrote a poem examining this. It's called Little Fire. I was always so afraid of being left behind. I was sure the rapture would take you all in the twinkling of an eye and strand me because I questioned too much. Sometimes I doubted. Often I pined for the lost boys who sat petulant, spraddled on the back pew. One day the wrath was too much, so I never darkened that door again. I wandered for years in the wilderness. Not one of you offered shelter. I stood on your creaking porch with my suitcase at my feet, staring at a closed door. I heard the clock striking 7 inside. You watched from the curtain's edge, holding your breath. I had nothing but little creeks and trees to comfort me, dogs, books, music, mountains. I found a family when blood left me in the cold night, but somehow I kept myself warm. All my life, you've told me I'm no good. You've said I'm not worthy of God's love. But there was always this little fire burning in me, and no one ever could put it out. There was a lot of damage perpetuated on me by that church, as you can see. But the older I get, the more I try to remind myself of the love that I found there too. There were so many loving, good people who were good to me in that church. I could not rectify their open arms with them nodding along to the hellfire damnation being preached by our pastor, whom they refused to question, even if they didn't agree with him. I still cannot rectify that. But they were our entire community. We spent 2 or 3 nights a week and every Sunday morning there. And as I said, the services were very long. I wasn't allowed to take my Hot Wheels or my Star Wars action figures with me, but I was allowed to take a notebook and a pencil. So I spent most of my time writing character sketches of the people in the church, or I made up stories for their lives when they were not there. Going to church this often was integral to my becoming a writer and to my becoming a person. Here I learned how to observe, how to memorize, how to study people properly and from different angles. There is not much formality in the Holiness Church, so I was often allowed to stretch out beneath the pews where I could closely and unbeknownst to anyone else study the lower parts of people. You can learn a whole lot about people from studying them only from the knee down. I think Forrest Gump said something about you can learn a lot about people's shoes, right? Some people never polish their shoes, for instance. Some people polish their shoes to a fare thee well. Some people came to church with mud caked on their shoes. These are important details to a writer. The most fun was to be beneath the pews when everyone started shouting, which is when they would holler out and dance. I laid there and imagined an earthquake had come. I learned the power of music there. The hugeness of words was reinforced to me every time someone got up to testify and poetry would mysteriously fall out of their mouths. These were good, hard-working people. They didn't have much else but going to church. And sometimes when they stood up to give their passionate testimony, it could make a believer out of anybody. As a holiness boy, I did everything with the other church members. We went to Mammoth Cave together. We ate together at least twice a week. We sought each other out at the junior high, desperate to find companions that would not cuss nor talk about sex all day long. We went roller skating together on gospel night, all of us wearing our matching t-shirts that had holy rollers printed across the back. Pretty clever. I felt loved by these people, but I also knew if they discovered the real me, the gay me, the writer me, the liberal me, that love would be snatched away. Theirs was a love that could take flight at the merest whisper of being the other. By the time I was 16, I could no longer take the constant bigotry, and I left. This was no small feat for me. I was not only leaving everything and almost everyone I knew and loved. I had believed and believed and believed, and then one day I had started that aforementioned questioning. This was too complex for most of the people in my church. And so I wandered alone in the wilderness for many years, trying to figure out exactly what I believed in and how to act on it. I decided I could make my own church in the wildwood. I was carried through by the secular holy, the natural world, dogs, created family, art, paintings, films, music, dancing, but most of all, books, always books. And more than anything, I was carried along by writing. I put all of my fears and hopes into my writing, turning my loss into stories and novels. But I still felt adrift, uncertain, afraid I would never find a congregation that would truly welcome me. Imagine then the spiritual and religious breakthrough for me when I read the following poem by Mary Oliver, and I'm sure many of you know it. I think it's a lesson in how to be a better person, a lesson in how to not judge, but to have compassion, to spread love instead of hatred. It's about finding the holy in everything. Wild geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert praying. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscape, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue sky, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. The God of my understanding shows up in that poem. A thing of so much beauty must surely possess the divine. What Oliver is saying, I believe, is that we don't have to punish ourselves to be children of God, that in fact, God is love. These are verses of kindness and compassion, and they remind us to look for God's wisdom in everything, like the wild geese. They are also verses that closely align with Anglican ideas, and particularly the Episcopal Church, where I have found a home. At the Church of the Good Shepherd in Lexington, I was taken in as I am. I love the word Eucharist. It's so beautiful. And I love the act of taking the Eucharist. I love the moment of kneeling at the altar rail, bowing my head, the way the rector presses the wafer into the center of my palm, the trust involved in drinking from the same chalice as others, the fullness of meditation that engulfs me in that one small moment. The Eucharist carries me through the entire week. I wish I could go back all those years ago to all those long services at the Lily Holiness Church and give little boy me the peace that the Eucharist now affords me. For me, the Eucharist feels like supplication and love. With that little country church in your mind's eye, I want to talk to you about being Appalachian and being working class and being accented. Those three things are a braid, nearly impossible to separate. All of my life, I have been judged on where I'm from. Sometimes I talk about this and people accuse me of comparing regionalism to racism. To be clear, I do not believe there's any comparison there between being judged on your skin color and being judged on your accent. But I do think the way so many react to accents is a clear commentary on how classist our society remains. I carry Appalachia on my tongue. When I was young, some of my teachers and others tried to rid me and my schoolmates of our accents. Most of us refused, sensing that we would be losing some part of ourselves. It was only later that I realized that language was part of my identity, and much later that language is political. We lived the first 8 years of my life in a 2-bedroom house trailer that sat on the banks of the Laurel River. Almost everyone in my family lived in trailers. And even after my parents and I moved out of ours, I spent the majority of my time in the trailer homes of aunts, uncles, cousins, friends. We had a saying in our family: the rain sounds loveliest on a trailer roof. And it really does. I never thought anything of what it meant to live or spend time in trailers until one evening I was playing in front of my aunt's trailer in the hottest part of the summer. I was 10, and I was playing Star Wars with my cousin in the front yard. I was Luke Skywalker. He was Darth Vader. We were fighting to the death with our plastic lightsabers. And then a car went by and blew its horn, causing us to look up. There was a man, probably in his mid-20s, hanging halfway out of the car's window. He cupped his hands around his mouth and yelled, "Trailer trash!" He was talking to us, of course. It didn't matter that my aunt worked every night on the 3rd shift at the yarn factory, and that her freshly mown yard was meticulous, that her porch was populated by good solid furniture and hanging pots of luscious fuchsia. It didn't matter that we were human beings who were just trying to get by the best way we could. To this car passing by, we were trash because we lived in a trailer in a small little town where nothing much ever happened. But I knew we were not trash. I knew we were people. He was talking about my people who worked hard and loved harder. Being called trailer trash was a defining moment for me. Those 2 words hit me in the gut, not so much because they were directed at me, but because they were directed at most everyone I knew and loved. My people had been reduced to one ugly phrase, a phrase that exists solely to do harm. Many people's definition of Appalachian is not much different than that of trailer trash. I want to draw a fine point on this because this is something I still see happening amongst polite company today, polite company. Not too long ago, I was with one of the most acclaimed writers in our country, someone who writes widely about social justice issues, and they used the word trailer trash in my presence, expecting me to laugh along with them. I didn't, because that phrase serves no other purpose but to negate and belittle. I cannot imagine anything much worse than assigning the word trash to anyone. When I hear the phrase, I see the faces of my family swim up before me. Beyond that, I'm troubled by how easily we can throw people aside. I, of course, have had moments of weakness. I always strive to be diplomatic in my public life and interactions. I try my best to extend grace to everyone, even those with whom I vehemently disagree. But a couple times, I have lost my cool in the face of constant bigotry. I am never proud of those moments. In fact, I'm very embarrassed by them, even when I know that I must defend myself and others. None of us are perfect, and I certainly am not. But I do believe that we should always be trying our best to not negate others, to never simplify others, to always extend grace. The trying is the most important part. I believe that by trying our best to be good, we can become good, or at least better. That's something I've wondered about my whole life, how to be good. The best way I know is to be conscious, to be conscientious, to be questioning and trying. The only way I know how to do that is to do unto my neighbor as I would have them do unto me. The many facets of myself often tangle together to tackle these issues: my faith, my orientation, my place of birth, all the things that make me who I am. Before I conclude, I want to mention one other part of this that has increasingly become a part of my identity, and that's being the product of a public school education. First, a disclaimer. What I'm about to say is in no way criticism of anyone who has gone to private school. On the contrary, it's a celebration of public education and public educators in a time when they are being maligned for political reasons. Just recently, a gubernatorial candidate released an ad that attacks public school teachers, accusing them of pushing their own political agendas on students simply by respecting requests to not be dead named and to teach the true history of colonialism and genocide in our own country. When I was in 7th grade, I had a teacher who changed my life. Her name was Sandra Stidham. She taught at Lilly Elementary School. Miss Stidham did several things that changed my life forever, and I want to put particular emphasis on 3 of those things. First of all, on the first day of class, she stood up and passionately read aloud to us a poem by Edna St. Vincent Millay, God's World. When she was finished, I saw that she had tears in her eyes. This unlatched something for me. I had never seen an adult moved by literature before, and although I had certainly been made to feel that way by books, I had never known it was okay. Seeing this adult, a teacher, moved by literature gave me permission to be moved by it as well. Secondly, she was bothered that our county curriculum did not offer any literature for 7th graders, only grammar. So she brought in her own books and allowed us to borrow them from her. By doing so, she introduced me to some of my most foundational books. Third, she said if we borrowed a book from her, we had to do a book report. I did a lot of them, and she saw a talent for writing in me. She pulled me aside and told me I was different. She told me that I could write. She told me that I read in a different way. She saw something in me, and she told me it was there. All young people need someone to recognize that in them. And while she was the best, she was not the only great teacher I had in the public school systems of Kentucky, of rural Kentucky. I had many who went the extra mile for me, who encouraged me, and I will always be thankful for my public school education, and I will always defend public school teachers, no matter what. So I've told you about the many different facets of myself. I've shown you my multitudes, and I've lingered in particular on a handful: being a person of faith, being a gay person, being working class, being accented, being the product of public schools. But what ties all of this together? For me, it's the desire to be good. We connect that especially to religion, but I believe that most people are trying their best to be good, no matter what they believe in, or if they believe in anything at all. Most of the people I am close to meditate on the mystery of it all. My faith journey has been one of trying to rectify being a human being and being good. I connect the desire to be good to being raised working class because so often when you are raised in poverty or the working class, the world tells you you are not good. They tell you that your people are genetically inferior or that you just need to pull up your bootstraps. Never mind if you don't even have any boots. They tell you you are trash. They tell you you're not as smart. They tell you that your way of speaking is ignorant and sounds poor. Even now, I'm 51 years old, and I'm constantly fighting this imposter syndrome and trying to always do the best I can because some part of me wants to prove them all wrong. I want to prove to them that I am just as good as they are, just as my parents always taught me. And of course, from the time I first realized I was gay, around the age of 10, I was questioning if this meant I was a bad person or not. My pastor was certainly telling me that I was. I believe that the whole reason we're here is to be good to each other, to do good, to help others, to leave this world better than the way we found it. Remember in Oliver's poem, Wild Geese, how she begins it. You do not have to be good. You do not have to be. I believe she's saying that God will love us no matter what. But even if we don't have to be, it sure makes the world a better place if we try to be. And I believe that we can be better by trying to be better, by pulling on all the multitudes we contain and gaining strength not just from one of them, but from all of them. We are good because of the multitudes we contain, not in spite of them. My wish for all of us tonight is to keep trying to be good, but also to occasionally give ourselves a break and accept that we are good, that God lives in us, that every one of us is holy. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. I appreciate you so much. We have about 12 minutes for questions. We need to end promptly at 7 o'clock, I'm told. So I don't want the shepherd's hook to come out, so I will keep us on time. Who has a question?
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate your what it felt like to be an outsider. And I am a person that went to school and also a lawyer. We're done with words and religion a lot. And I found that today, in today's world, I have to live with both love and rage.
Yep.
Part of my living. And I was at a racial equity webinar today. Someone said, if you're not enraged today, you're not
Paying attention. Yeah.
And I think that I wanted to hear you speak because I hear the importance of love and compassion. But as a woman, I refuse to be polite like I was trained to be as a little girl.
Right.
And I believe that being enraged, living in rage, is what we see going on is important. And I do lose my cool a lot, but I always try to end with love. But I'd like to hear how you practice that.
Well, I think you articulated it very well. I think there is love in the rage. You know, the rage I feel is not so much for the way it attacks me personally, but the way it attacks people I love, you know. And I think that's where most people that I hear who are enraged, that's the place they're coming from. So it is coming from love, you know. The thing is, you know, being in the public eye for 22 years, there are times when, you know, I have lost my cool, and I always regret that. I regret losing my cool, but I don't regret defending the people I love, if that makes sense. And so, and you know, and the thing is sometimes I'll hear people say, "Why do I always have to be the one who's giving grace? Why am I always have to be the peacemaker?" And you know, that's the question. But I think that for the most part, I feel better when I do take on that, when I can stick to that role, and I feel like I have won the argument when I do in a better way. But I make my rage and my anger known, you know. But there is a way to do it. That's the thing. There's that line. So it is. I think for me, we just have to find ways to be fighting back in every way that we can. And my parents, would have never thought of themselves as social justice warriors, but they were doing all this quiet stuff behind the scenes that really was social justice. They were feeding a lot of people and helping people in various ways, and nobody knew it, but I still meet people all the time who come up to me and tell me, I wouldn't have had shoes to wear to school if your parents hadn't paid for them for me, and things like that. So that kind of love is the only thing that I know how to really fight back. Being part of the social justice movement, I was involved in the environmental justice movement. We were up against huge budgets for publicity campaigns and stuff like that. And all we had were words and music, ever. That's all we had, were our speeches and our songs. And we got a long way with it, We made changes happen. I think part of this, that's so huge right now is that death rattle against all of that. I keep hoping that it's, it's a reaction to progress. I'm sorry, that's a rambling answer, but it's a really hard question. Yes.
Lark Ascending, there's not a lot of detail about the groups who've taken over the world. Could you talk about your decision to take that approach?
Well, the thing is, when you're doing world building, it can take over the whole book. And I wanted to leave most of that to the imagination and let the reader I wanted the reader to imagine their own worst nightmare in those scenarios. And I think it makes it powerful for each reader when they can assign their own worst fears to that as much as possible. I did put a lot of my own fears into the book, but I wanted to give the reader some power over that too. Thank you for reading Lark Ascending.
I see you as such a mentor. I want to know how have a few people that you have co-authored and I was wondering how that's going for you. I'm personally trying to write something very seriously, but seriously, taking it seriously. I was wondering how you are able to help each other out.
Mm-hmm. I think the main thing is you have to really develop your gut instinct, and you have to, even the best intentioned mentor or reader will sometimes just not have it right, and you have to know. But you also have to know when the criticism is absolutely right, One of the main things is a good editor and a good mentor will always have a whole big long list of reasons they're telling you to change something, especially if they're telling you to get rid of it. So always keep that in mind. If they want you to lose one paragraph, then they should have at least 2 or 3 paragraphs reason why you should. I think that's the real test of a reader or a mentor or an editor. That question, I can talk to you afterwards, and maybe we can talk longer about that. It's sort of a lengthy answer, but that's the real succinct one I have. Thank you.
First, how you life is going to be different being the poet laureate, what changes that'll bring to you. And also, I wanted to know, your love of dogs, what you used to create such a bond, such a loving friendship.
My life is going to change, and already has. It's just gotten twice as busy. It's there's just a lot that has to be done in the 2 years as poet laureate. And I already feel like the clock counting down, and I feel like I'm not going to have enough time to do everything I want to do because I already have this platform in mind. So the day that I was inducted, I was already talking to teachers about ways to work with them to do programming and things like that. The other thing is, I think that bond is just because I've always had that with dogs, and most people have an animal, that they really identify with, and for me, it's always been dogs. And my dog was right beside me the entire time I was writing that book. I was telling somebody earlier today that often I would have to move his ear off my laptop keyboard because I write on a bench outside and inside on a couch, and he's always right there beside me. And also in the book, I tried to give Lark some, hopefully it's subtle for the reader, but I tried to give Lark some sensibilities that a dog had. For instance, he's much more aware of scent than human characters are usually. Like the scent of cedar is something that's woven throughout the book for Lark, and just things like that.
As an educator, 46
Thank you. Thank you. We have 3 minutes. No, it took them about 10 years. It was a long 10 years. I had to give a lot of grace during that time. Yeah. But it's all great now, but it took them a long time. It was pretty terrible. But now they love my husband more than me, I think. So, yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first of it. Yes. I was always writing before that, but she gave me permission. It was like she made me think that I could do it because she started talking to me about writing, and she read my short stories. She's still among the first people to read my books, and it's still, a great, one of the people that I admire the most. And so she's always an inspiration, and I don't go anywhere without invoking her name. Yeah. I think we have time for one more. Well, I mean, it's changed over the years, but the consistent ones for me are Willa Cather, Alice Walker, Thomas Hardy, and Lee Smith. Lee Smith being my main mentor, who's was an established writer and took me under her wing and was so incredibly generous. Lee Smith is the most generous writer that there is that I know of. So if you haven't read Lee Smith, my favorite book by her is Fair and Tender Ladies, but she has a new one that just came out last week called Silver Alert. I'll just do a little commercial. But thank you all so much. I appreciate you so much.